I was on my way to deliver an order from the sandwich shop I worked for. It was a quiet night, around 11 or so. I had my music playing in my car, and I was just running through the motions of the delivery. On my way to their neighborhood, I pulled up to a red light. There was nobody else at the intersection, but for some reason, the light stayed red for what felt like an abnormal amount of time. As I sat there and stared at the light, waiting for it to change, a car pulled up beside me. I only glanced over for a second, not wanting to make that awkward eye contact, but their windows were heavily tinted, like definitely more than what was legal, as I couldn't see a single thing through them. The car itself was black as well, maybe an old Toyota or something. I can't really pinpoint what it was, but I got a really uneasy feeling about them. It could have just been that we were the only two on the road. I'm really not sure. Eventually the light turned green and I started going. I didn't get very far though before noticing they hadn't moved. They were still parked at the intersection. Once I got further down the road, I shrugged it off and just thought it was weird and nothing else. A couple minutes later, I pulled off into the section of housing that the delivery was in. I'd say neighborhood, but it wasn't really a neighborhood. It was just a line of 10 or so houses leading to a dead end. Something about it seemed really off-putting. Of all the houses on the street, not a single one had a light on. I 100% would have thought these places were abandoned, if not for the fact that the houses themselves looked really nice. They looked like ordinary neighborhood homes, with not a single sign of anything wrong with them. I figured it had to just be a coincidence that every resident down the street had their lights off. Anyway, the address I had was for the second to last house. I pulled up and parked on the curb, getting out with the order and walking up to the door. I was hoping I'd at least see some sort of light coming through the windows of this house because it was the one I was delivering to, but standing on the porch, I didn't see any light. Reluctantly, I knocked on the door. When I did, the door swung a bit from its hinges, like it wasn't properly shut or locked. Now this was even more odd. "Sandwich delivery. Anyone home?" It was completely silent. No response, and not even the slightest sound from inside the house. I was gonna leave, but just to be sure I didn't miss anything, I cracked the door open a little further. I could see a hallway and a room. Both were empty of any furniture or decorations, not even a single picture on the wall. It only took a few seconds before dust started coming through the doorway too. I shut it and backed up from the porch. I was very confused and slightly worried. As I walked back down to my car though, I noticed something down the road. A few houses back, there was a small black car that wasn't there when I pulled in. Its headlights were off and it was parked. Once I saw the tinted windows, I immediately recognized it. I felt my face go white, knowing this could not possibly be a coincidence at this point. I started to hurry to my car, but as I got just a few feet away from the road, I saw something move in the reflection of one of the windows. I wasn't sure what it was that I saw, but I stopped in place. I was standing near the passenger door, and through the window, my eyes fell on the back seat. It was dark, but there was something blocking the back window. It only took me about a second for me to realize what I saw. I turned and bolted back to the house. As I did, the back door to my car swung open, and a man in a black hoodie and black pants came running out. He didn't chase me though. He ran straight down to the road and into his car. I stayed on the porch, and with my heart pounding, I dialed 911. I probably could have gotten in my car and left at that point, but I was too scared to really think straight. Police arrived and immediately told me that this whole street was unoccupied, as the homes were new builds. Guess that explains why I thought they looked so nice and not abandoned. What I definitely didn't expect was to hear them say that they've had multiple reports this past week, very similar to mine. The guy would order something for delivery with a fake name and address, then follow the driver. What happened to me was the closest call of any of them, though. The guy had snuck inside my car and was waiting for me to get in and maybe even drive away. Who knows what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on finding him. I was 20 and worked with my parents at a really small takeout restaurant. We specialized in to-go orders. I was in college at the time and was on a very hectic schedule, but my parents were kind enough to offer me a laid-back position just as a general worker, usually just working the to-go table or cleaning up the place after closing hours. This was during early December, and with finals coming up, I didn't have much time to work during the day, so I was taking up mostly late night shifts where I'd just clean for a few hours, then head home. One of the nights I was working, I noticed around an hour into my shift that a car was parked in the parking lot. The way our restaurant was laid out, it was a standalone shop with a tiny parking lot in front of it, so there was no crossover between other stores or businesses. I thought whoever parked there probably just didn't think anyone would care, and they were right, because I really didn't care. 20 or so minutes later, they left. However, the next night, around the same time, the car pulled into the parking lot again. The first time it was fine because I thought it was just a one-time thing, but coming back again was strange. I walked up to the front of the building and looked out. It was an older gray sedan with dark windows. They didn't seem to be trying to hide or anything because they were facing right at the building and they kept their headlights on. I double-checked that the doors were locked before getting back to cleaning. It was hard not to feel like they were watching me through the giant glass front windows, but just like last time, they left not too long after. I finished up my work and clocked out an hour later. Walking to my car in the parking lot, I felt really uneasy. I knew they had left, but it was just concerning that the same car came by 2 nights in a row for seemingly no reason. I drove home and got some rest. Having a lot of schoolwork to do, I decided to take off the next night, so I didn't return to work until the following night. The whole time I was inside cleaning, I had this anxious feeling that made me constantly look out the windows, expecting that car to come back at any point, but I never saw them pull in. I was inside for nearly 3 hours and finished everything I had to do, and not having seen the car come by this night, I felt like maybe it really was all nothing. I packed my stuff up and headed out, locking the door behind me. As I walked through the parking lot, that anxious and uneasy feeling rushed back to me. It felt like I suddenly got a burst of adrenaline, making me sweat and look in all directions. Then, as I was halfway across and standing out in the open, my eyes spotted a car sitting in the far back of the parking lot, away from all the street lamps that lit up the area. Within seconds, it started moving, quickly driving toward me. I sprinted to my car, but I could hear their tires skidding on the pavement as they sped up right beside me and slammed on the brakes. I stumbled forward, thinking they were about to hit me. I was only a few feet away from my car at this point, and suddenly the doors of their car swung open. I didn't even turn my head to look, having my focus completely on getting into my car. Footsteps rushed behind me just as I opened my car and got in. Through the windows, I saw 3 men wearing masks and hoodies sprinting up to me. My hands were shaking as I tried to get my car to turn on. The men started banging on the windows and trying to get the doors open, but I barely got it in drive and drove past them. I got out of the parking lot and onto the road, and from there I was safe. I called 911 and pulled into a well-lit gas station nearby to wait for them. Unfortunately, the outside of our shop didn't have any cameras, so the information the police had to go off of was minimal. I couldn't even see any of the men's faces. After that night, it's no surprise that I never saw the car or the men again. This was last year toward the beginning of December. One of my good friends was going on a trip with his family and would be gone for a whole week. He asked if I wanted to house sit his place while they were gone. We were really good family friends, so this wasn't all that unusual. I actually did the same thing for them last year as well. They had a couple fish tanks and a lot of houseplants that they needed me to take care of while they were away, and in return I'd get to stay at their house for a week. I lived in a really small apartment, so I was always glad to take them up on the offer and help out. I headed over a couple hours before they left, just to hang out and get a refresher on everything that I needed to do. Once they left, I unpacked some things and got settled in, and around 6, I went out to pick up some dinner. I brought it back to the house and ate in the living room while watching TV. Only a half hour later, there was a knock at the door. I paused the show and got up, looking to see who it was. It was a man in his 30s. He wasn't wearing a delivery uniform or anything. He just looked like a regular dude. I cracked the door open and asked what he needed. He looked startled to see me, but quickly recovered and asked if my friend was home right now. He called him by his name, so I thought he might have been a friend or something, but I told him he'd have to come back some other time. He didn't ask anything else and just walked away. I probably should have asked what he needed, but I felt like he should have told me to begin with. I was sure it was nothing, but I texted my friend just to let him know who came by. He called me soon after and asked who he was, and after a brief conversation, he said he had no idea who that guy could have been. I kept an eye out for the rest of the day, but still felt like it was probably nothing serious. I watched TV for a while, then went around the house watering the plants and feeding the fish. Around 9, I started getting the couch set up for bed. I tossed a few blankets down and made a little sleeping area. As I did, there was another knock at the door. I walked over, more confused than anything, but was immediately unnerved to see the same guy outside the door. This time, I didn't open it. "Hey, what do you need? Can you come back a different day?" I yelled through the door. I watched as the man listened and stared at the door like he was thinking, but instead of responding, he just walked away again. I made sure the door was locked before going back to the couch. It was then that I definitely should have called the police, but for some reason I really didn't want to. Especially being at someone else's house, I was worried that this was all just a misunderstanding. Not to mention, the guy hadn't actually done anything yet. I would just have to explain that he came by twice and stood at the door. It kind of sounds silly, honestly. It definitely woke me up though, and I didn't feel comfortable going to bed right away. I stayed up on my phone and had the window curtains open so I could see if he walked up again. I probably waited for a good 2 hours before my eyes started getting heavy. I did one last check out the windows before closing the curtains and getting ready for bed. I brushed my teeth, then hopped in the shower to quickly rinse off. By the time I got out, dried off, and went back downstairs, it had been less than 10 minutes. I went around and turned off all the lights, and before getting in bed, I figured I'd do one last check out the windows, just to help me sleep easy. I looked out, seeing nothing but trees swaying in the wind and the empty road in front of the house. I stepped back, and as I went back over to the couch, my eyes drifted toward the front door, catching something off. The lock was sideways. I walked over, thinking I was seeing things wrong, but no, it was unlocked. I was completely certain I'd locked it, Not even a doubt in my mind. I froze up for a second before I felt adrenaline surge through me. I turned around and crept over to the couch to grab my phone that I left on the end table, but it wasn't there. Someone had already taken it. I didn't stay a second longer, grabbing my keys and running out the front door. I used the emergency button in my car to call 911 as I pulled out of the driveway and parked further down the road to wait. When police pulled up and searched the home, they found the man, same one that came by twice, sitting in one of the spare bedrooms. When they arrested him, he didn't say a word, like he was completely mute. They found a forged key in his pocket that matched the front door, and nobody knows how he got it. My friend told me again that he had no clue who the man was or why he'd break into his home, but it honestly felt like there was something he wasn't telling me. Suspiciously, we haven't talked much after that either. I don't know what was going to happen that night. If I didn't notice the door was unlocked and went to bed, I really don't think I would have woken up. It was a normal night after work, getting home at 10. I was exhausted, but ready to stay up late and game. All my buddies worked early tomorrow, so I was just playing solo and relaxing. A few hours into the night, I heard what sounded like a knock. I took my headphones off and listened for it again, but it was quiet now. I thought surely it had to be a knock at the front door, as it was pretty loud and I didn't know what else it could be. I went over to check it out, but nobody was on the porch. The more I thought about it, a single knock would have been odd if there were someone at the door. I still didn't know what it was that I heard, but I went back to gaming. It must have only been a half hour later that I heard another sound. It was a sort of click, like something closing. I immediately took my headset off and looked behind me. Again, the house was quiet now. I got up and did a walkthrough of the house. I didn't thoroughly check every inch of the place. I was just trying to spot any obvious signs of what I'd been hearing. The house was fairly old, so usually I chalk these things up to being the aging wood. After checking around and not seeing anything, that's exactly what I did, and I went back to my desk. I was still a little hesitant to put my headset back on, but eventually I did anyway. Only a couple minutes later though, a reflection suddenly moved across my computer screen. Maybe it was a shadow, I don't know, but I jumped up and spun around. This time, it was almost like I knew, without a doubt, that someone was inside my home and had just walked somewhere behind me. My desk was in the living room, so there was a long hallway behind it with 3 separate rooms, and at the end was the front door. I took a few seconds to recollect myself and think about which way the reflection moved across my screen, and realized it had moved from the left side of the hallway to the right side. There was only one door on the right, which was to my bedroom. It felt like in that moment, the silence of the whole house was deafening, making each second pass feel more and more terrifying, knowing almost for sure that someone else was in that room. I decided my best bet was to just run for the front door and hope whoever was in the room didn't jump out at me. After a few seconds, I forced myself to move, running down the hall and through the front door. I heard nothing as I fled the house. I called the cops and waited outside for several long minutes. They went in, and I still couldn't believe it when they pulled a man out the front door. I knew someone had broken in, but actually seeing it was really unsettling. He looked around 55, but was very large. His face was uncanny, with wide, bloodshot eyes and a disheveled beard. Even worse, they found 2 knives on him. It seemed he had no particular reason for choosing me as a victim of whatever he was trying to do, which I guess was supposed to make me feel better, But honestly, it didn't. It just means he was completely insane and would have done anything without hesitation had he had the chance to. I think I just got really lucky that night to even be standing here today. I used to work for a small startup company. I'm not even really sure what they did because I was just a security person, but I always thought it was a little strange that they even felt they needed a security guard. The office was really small and looked somewhat unimportant, like any other office. It made my job easy though, because I didn't have to parade around multiple floors all night. I got in at 9 and turned on the security alarm systems, then headed to the little security room that had all the camera screens set up. The place only had outdoor cameras, which were really low quality. The first couple hours went by slowly, with the usual nothing going on. Sometime around 1 a.m. though, I heard what sounded like a latch clicking shut. I sat there confused for a moment, then stood up and opened the door to the hallway. Everything looked exactly how I'd left it. There were only 3 doors down the hallway, and each one was closed. I walked over to each door, opening them and briefly looking around. The rooms were layered with a bunch of office desks, but from what I could see, it was all normal. By now, it had been long enough for me to start wondering if the sound I heard was actually what I thought it was. Maybe I just didn't hear it right. After all, the security systems should have triggered an alarm if someone had opened one of the main doors to get inside. So I went back to the room, this time leaving the door open to the hallway, so if I heard it again, it'd be more clear. Then I sat back and continued monitoring the cameras. I checked the footage from the previous few minutes just to see if I missed anything, but I didn't see anything at all. No movement outside the building. Another 20 minutes passed. I think by then, I'd pretty much came to terms that whatever I heard was nothing, as I was back to not paying as much attention. Then, a sound echoed down the hallway. It was faint. A door opening slowly. I jumped up from my chair and walked into the hallway, not believing what I heard. I immediately saw one of the doors was cracked open. Knowing that none of the alarms went off and nothing had shown up on the cameras, I was extremely confused. I was sure that nobody could be in here. I crept over and opened the door a little further, revealing the dark office room. I took a few steps inside, but didn't hear or see anything, so I started to walk further in, going past each office desk. Then, as I got to the back of the room, I saw the slightest movement on one of the walls, like a shadow or something, before I turned my head and instantly locked eyes with a person crouched underneath one of the desks, hair in large dark circles under his eyes. He had a look of both fear and anger, like he was both mad and worried that I'd found him. The instant we saw each other though, he started getting up. I had no idea if he had any kind of weapons on him, so I took no chances and started running for my life. I went into the hallway and out the front doors, which triggered the security alarms and automatically notified the police. I went a safe distance away, then tried to watch the front doors as I waited for the officers to show up. It only took about 30 seconds before the door swung open and the man came running out. He ran around to the other side of the building, and from there I lost sight of him. When officers got there, we downloaded the footage from the whole night, but nowhere in it did we see the man enter the building, so we don't know when or even how they got in. Obviously, the other question is why they broke in. After discussing it with the company, they said they knew nothing about it and didn't find anything missing. I have a hunch that they might have known more than they let on though. Hiring security for their tiny office isn't normal unless you have a reason to. I think it might have actually been an old employee that they knew was a little unhinged. Anyway, I stayed there for another few months, then called it quits for a better job. I never found out anything else about what happened that night. I was pretty young when this happened, I think 16 or 17. It was at my first job, which was just some trashy pizza place. They paid slightly more than other places, and I made extra from tips when I did deliveries, so I stayed there for a while. I don't remember too much about the beginning of my shift this night. I probably started at my regular time, around 6, and was scheduled until 12, but the whole first half of my shift went by like any other day. It was sometime around 10 that we got an order for delivery, so I packed it up and left to drop it off. The place was 15 minutes away, in a small neighborhood. It took me a minute to find the house though, because all the trees were blocking the address numbers, and a lot of the homes had long driveways leading far from the road. Eventually I did find it, after circling back a few times. I drove down the driveway and parked closer to the home. It was one of those large houses that looked like it was built forever ago. I got the food and walked up to the front porch. It was hard not to notice how quiet it was in this neighborhood. It felt like I was so far away from everything, especially with the trees everywhere. When I got up to the porch though, the front door was wide open. I'd seen a lot of people leave their doors cracked open before, but the way this one was fully open was a little bit excessive. Anyway, I walked over and knelt down to set the food inside the house, when a voice called out, "Hey, would you mind bringing the pizza in here? I'm just setting up the table." It was a man's voice, but they sounded friendly. I knew it was frowned on to enter someone's home while delivering, but honestly, it was a fairly normal request and usually didn't take more than a few extra seconds and typically secured a good tip. I stepped inside and walked down the hallway into the kitchen. I set the box on the table, but nobody else was in there. I'd just heard his voice only moments ago, and I never heard him walk anywhere else. I also noticed the house was extremely quiet, like no other sounds at all. I felt a shiver run through me, and as I decided to leave, his voice called out again. "Can you bring it in here, please?" His voice came from the other hallway connecting to the kitchen. There was a single door that was open, but whatever room was behind it was dark. There was no light on. It also sounded like his voice came from right behind the doorway, like he was standing just out of sight. After a few seconds, I turned around and fast walked back out the front door. I got in my car and drove back to work, and I never said a word about it. I thought I'd either get made fun of for being scared or for being stupid, so I just kept it to myself. Thinking back on it now though, there was definitely something up with that guy. Nothing about that encounter was normal. I'm just glad that at least I was smart enough to leave when I did, because there's really no saying what would have happened if I went into that room with him.